Fire. For the next 17 and a half minutes, this may be the only warmth you feel. Because this story begins where winter was not weather. It was pressure. On the house, on the animals, on the food, on every decision made before the snow arrived. And when that system failed, the cold did not need to attack. It only had to wait. With time, everything changes, except legends. Welcome to Civora. The Viking winter was not survived by strength alone. It was survived by systems. Not one system. Not a single trick passed down through generations. A web of dependencies, so tightly woven that pulling one thread could unravel the rest. A house that held warmth inside its walls. A fire that had to be fed before anything else was fed. Wool layered against skin that the cold was already trying to reach. Food packed and sealed in the months before snow closed the world. Animals kept breathing through the long dark. Because losing them was not just losing meat. It was losing next year. For generations across the Viking-age Scandinavian world, this web held. Farms endured long nights, hard winds, and wet cold that settled into timber and bone. They endured weeks with no news, no visitors, and no certainty that the stores would last until the season turned. They did not survive because they were stronger than winter. They survived because they had built their lives around it. But every system has an edge. And far out across the North Atlantic, where the stone was harder, the driftwood scarcer, and the nearest neighbor might be a week's sail away, that edge began to show. Imagine a single winter night going wrong. The fire burns lower than it should. Someone forgot to bring in the last stack of wood before the storm sealed the door. Now the house is colder. The animals in the far end of the longhouse shift and pull against their tethers. The children wake. One mistake. One cold night. A strong farm survives that. But winter was not one night. It was a season of pressure applied to every weakness at once. The body needed warmth without pause. The fire needed fuel. The animals needed fodder. The roof needed to hold. The food had to last until the ground thawed and grazing returned. One failure could pull another behind it. A weak roof could expose stored food. A low fire could leave clothing damp. A thin storehouse could turn every meal into a decision. The real danger of winter was not a single catastrophe. It was the narrowing of choices. Week after week, the farm lost room to make mistakes. The Viking winter system existed to protect that room. Every part of it connected to every other part. The house protected the fire. The fire helped preserve the food. The food kept the people working, and the people kept the animals alive. Cut one link, and the chain did not simply shorten. It began to unravel from that point in both directions. To understand why, we have to step inside the place where the chain was held together. Step inside. The ceiling is low. The air is thick with smoke, and the smell of animals, and damp wool, and wood smoke, and bodies that have not seen open air in days. You do not walk into a Viking longhouse and feel comfortable. You walk in and feel the cold stop. That was the design. Not to give every person space. Not to separate the sleeping from the working, from the cooking, from the animals. Not to provide clean air or privacy, or the quiet dignity of separate rooms. To keep the warmth from escaping. Everything that needed heat. The people, the food, the tools, the animals, was pulled inward, compressed into a shared space where one fire could do the work of many. Distance was the enemy. A separate storehouse could freeze before you reached it. A detached stable meant heat lost to the night every time the door opened. A bed on the ground meant warmth stolen by the earth beneath you. So the longhouse solved the problem the only way a cold world allowed. It brought everything inside. Raised sleeping platforms along the walls, bodies lifted off the frozen ground, the hearth at the center, warmth radiating in every direction. Food, wool, tools, leather stacked within reach of firelight. And at the far end, separated by smell and sound, but not by walls, the animals, breathing, warm, alive, their bodies adding heat to the room they shared with the people who depended on them. This was not a home built for living well. It was a machine built for surviving winter. The smoke that blackened the rafters also preserved the meat hanging above the fire. The crowding that made the air heavy also made the air warm. The animals that made the space loud and foul also kept the temperature from dropping to the point where old people and infants stopped waking up. Every discomfort served a purpose. And that was the first real lesson of the Viking winter system. A lesson that would echo far out across the North Atlantic, all the way to the edge of the known world. They didn't defeat winter by becoming comfortable inside it. They defeated it by wasting nothing. By the Viking Age, everyone living in the cold knew fire. That is not the insight. That is the starting point. The insight was this: fire costs something every single hour it burns. An hour of warmth was an hour of wood. An hour of cooking was an hour of peat. An hour of light after sunset was an hour of driftwood collected from a shoreline that might be days away. And unlike the warmth it produced, the fuel did not come back. So fire, the center of the winter system, was also a slow drain on the resources that kept the system alive. This made every decision around the hearth a calculation. Every farm made a fire. The question was, how large, how long, and how hot? Could meat be dried closer to the embers to save wood for the night? Could the fire be banked lower before midnight if the children slept closer to the coals? Could the household stay slightly colder through this storm and still reach spring with enough fuel left? In Scandinavia, timber could be found, managed, and replaced over generations. Iceland reveals the danger more sharply. When Norse settlers arrived around the late 9th century, much of the island still held birch woodland. Within the next centuries, timber use, grazing, and land clearance stripped away most of that cover. A settlement could consume the very resource base that made settlement possible. And Greenland pushed the lesson further. There were no forests. There was driftwood. Unpredictable, seasonal, never guaranteed. There was turf. Slow to burn, hard to cut, not always dry. There was dried animal dung, a last resort that speaks more clearly about pressure than any heroic legend. The question beneath the winter system grew louder the farther west the settlers went. Not, can we survive the cold? But do we have enough fuel to survive this winter and still have something left when it ends? That question had no clever answer. It only had arithmetic. And fuel was only one side of the problem. Before winter reached the hearth, it had already passed through the hayfield. Before the snow, there was grass, a field under low northern light, wet ground, hands cutting hay while the weather still allowed it. Grass lifted, turned, dried, stacked, carried, and protected, because months later, when the land disappeared under frost and the animals could no longer graze, that field would decide who stayed alive. Winter was not won in winter. It was won before winter arrived. Every bundle of hay was future milk, future wool, future manure, future calves, and future strength for a farm that would need to begin again when the thaw came. If the hay failed, the failure entered the house through the animals. A cow that ate less gave less milk. A sheep that weakened gave less wool. A starving animal was not simply a hungry mouth. It was a warning that the farm was consuming its own future. Cutting hay was not background labor. It was winter planning in its rawest form. A household had to look at the animals it owned and ask a question no song would remember. Can we feed them until the grass returns? That question decided what lived, what was slaughtered, what was kept, and what the farm could risk. Keep too many animals, and the fodder might run out before the season ended. Slaughter too many, and the household might survive the winter while weakening the year after it. A full storehouse of meat could hide a future disaster if too many breeding animals were gone. Survival was not only about feeding people, it was about preserving the living machinery of the farm. Milk did not come from a barrel. Wool did not grow from a wall. Manure did not appear in the fields by itself. The future of the farm had to be kept alive through mouths that needed feeding every day. This is why fodder mattered. Without it, the system did not break loudly. It thinned. Less milk, fewer healthy animals, less manure for future fields, fewer calves and lambs to rebuild the herd. By the time the full cost became visible, the damage had already moved beyond one winter. In Greenland, the growing season was shorter, useful land was limited, and weather could punish a harvest before it was safely stored. A bad year could mean fewer animals surviving the winter, fewer animals producing in spring, and a weaker farm entering the next cycle already behind. The danger was not always sudden. A farm could continue while shrinking. One year, it survived. The next year, it survived with less, then less again. Behind every winter meal, every sleeping platform, and every managed fire, there was a quieter truth. Someone had to win the summer first. The hay had to be cut before rain ruined it. The stores had to be protected before damp reached them. The animals had to enter winter strong enough to survive it. Because when winter finally arrived, it was already too late to prepare. That was the quiet war before winter. No shield wall, no raid, just hands and wet grass, cutting time out of the land before darkness came. And if the hayfields were the first battlefield, the animals were the prize everyone was trying to save. Because in a Viking winter, an animal was never just an animal. It was the future breathing in the dark. That future did not vanish in a single winter. In Greenland, it faded in traces. One settlement weakened first. The western settlement, near what is now Nuuk, appears to have been abandoned by the middle of the 14th century. Later accounts describe farms there left empty, animals gone, people nowhere to be found. The eastern settlement lasted longer. There, life continued around churches, farms, hayfields, and the old rhythm of the Norse year. At Valsey, a stone church still stands in ruins. In 1408, a wedding was recorded there, one of the last written traces of Norse Greenland. After that, the record grows thin. The world around the settlers had changed. The climate had grown harsher in the North Atlantic. The sea routes were less reliable. European demand for walrus ivory, once one of Greenland's valuable exports, weakened as other sources of ivory entered the market. Inuit communities were also present in the same wider landscape, carrying Arctic hunting knowledge and technologies the Norse system had never fully become. Wood became harder to find. Iron became harder to replace. Every delayed ship made the settlement feel farther from the world that had once sustained it. Fodder, animals, tools, and trade were no longer separate problems. They were the same pressure entering through different doors. This is the concrete shape of the collapse. No single door breaking in the night. No one storm that explains everything. A system losing its ability to recover. That is the colder lesson behind the Viking winter system. Its strength was connection. House, fire, food, animals, labor, sea, season. Each part supported the others. But that was also its weakness. When everything depends on everything else, failure does not stay in one place. It travels. From the field to the animal. From the animal to the household. From the household to the next year. And in Greenland, where the land was harder, the forests absent, the sea uncertain, and the margin thinner, even a system that had worked for generations could begin to answer with less than winter demanded. So the Viking winter was never a simple battle between people and cold. It was a battle between preparation and pressure, between what had been stored and what could not be replaced, between the warmth inside the walls and the world waiting outside them. For centuries, the system held, until holding was no longer enough, because at the end, the cold did not defeat the Viking winter system by force. It defeated it by asking the same question, year after year: how much is left?